The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, I told you the story of 31-year-old Gemma Moss in the United Kingdom, and there was controversy over the coroner's report, which claimed that she had died from cannabis abuse or cannabis poisoning, stopping just short of calling it a so-called marijuana overdose, but really kind of implying that. Now, we have seen so much reaction to this, hundreds and hundreds of comments, many emails, and lots of new articles written about this concept of a marijuana overdose. And Vice has an article called "There is Still No Such Thing as a Fatal Marijuana Overdose," saying that in spite of the fact that the coroner's report, weirdly, in the absence of other definitive causes of death, said that cannabis poisoning was the reason for Gemma Moss's death, that there is absolutely no way that she died from any kind of so-called marijuana overdose. Now, there's a 1988 ruling from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, and it says, drugs used in medicine are routinely given what is called an LD50. The LD50 rating indicates at what dosage 50% of test animals receiving that dosage would die as a result of toxicity from that drug. A number of researchers have attempted to determine marijuana's LD50 rating in test animals without success. Simply stated, researchers have been unable to give animals enough marijuana to induce death. At present, it's estimated that marijuana's LD50 is around 1 to 20,000 or 1 to 40,000. These are ratios. In layman's terms, this means that in order to induce death, a marijuana smoker would have to consume 20,000 to 40,000 times as much marijuana as is in one marijuana cigarette. This would be about 1,500 pounds of marijuana in 15 minutes to induce a lethal response. Lewis, are you surprised by the amount of instantly, all of a sudden, the marijuana advocates are going into all of the technical research after we hear rumors of a so-called marijuana overdose?
Right. It's good to hear. I am pretty shocked at these numbers. I would have guessed it would be less than 1,500 pounds. But of course, this is just an estimate, right?
It is, yeah. And again, it's quite a wide range, 1 to 20,000, 1 to 40,000. Dr. Alan Shackelford is a Harvard-trained physician and a leading marijuana advocate in Colorado. He said to the Denver Post, "There's been no history of any verified reports of a death from cannabis ever." So people smoke cannabis, marijuana. People do have heart attacks. There will be a number of people, if you imagine a Venn diagram, which will be in the group of people who smoke marijuana and shortly thereafter have a heart attack. However, that also happens with other substances. It happens with no substances. Many people have cardiac arrest while they sleep. And to say that there is causality between sleeping and having a heart attack or marijuana and having a heart attack definitely brings up some serious scientific questions. And further, we have to remember that, let's say that it was true that Gemma Moss is the one person or one of two people in the UK that have supposedly died from a marijuana overdose, marijuana toxicity. Do we make things illegal based on freak unlikely accidents? It certainly doesn't seem to happen with alcohol.
Right. There are people smoking weed every day, all day, every day, and this isn't happening to them. Of course, we shouldn't rule based on that, but I have to assume that if smoking this joint somehow caused a heart attack, I have to assume that there was something wrong with her heart to begin with. It must have been in a weakened state.
And as such, smoking cigarettes, which happen to be legal, could have brought on the same freak cardiac arrest.
Exactly. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe even drinking, maybe even running up the stairs too fast. So, of course, this whole story is just a farce.
I want to tell you a little story about our friend in Wisconsin, Republican Governor Scott Walker. First, Scott Walker got into office in Wisconsin, and he said, I promise to create 250,000 new jobs. Then, instead of creating jobs, he started fighting unions and teachers to reduce their ability to negotiate collectively for benefits and salaries. That really didn't go too well. It led to tons of huge protests, a recall election, which he narrowly escaped leaving office after. And then, to prove that he can create jobs, just a couple of weeks ago, he featured and stood on stage with a convicted felon sex offender who got a new job and was only unemployed because of the fact that he had multiple felonies to his name. Okay, that was all pretty embarrassing for Scott Walker. It now turns out that Scott Walker appears to be under an investigation. He is the apparent subject of this investigation, which we're learning about through some newly unsealed court documents and media leaks, which are suggesting that it is in fact Scott Walker's campaign that is at the center of a wide-ranging secret probe into campaign finance violations during his 2011 and 2012 recall elections. This is called a John Doe probe. And a John Doe, it's similar to a grand jury, except it's in front of a judge instead of in front of a grand jury. And the idea is that the contents and the individuals involved are kept secret. And the John Doe probe started in August of 2012, and it was looking at illegal campaign coordination between blank, in other words, the name was redacted, a campaign committee, and certain special interest groups. Don't worry, the Koch brothers are involved with some of those special interest groups. And now Daniel Bice at the Journal Sentinel says why it looks like it is indeed Scott Walker's campaign that is involved here. He says, from the outset, the probe focused on possible illegal campaign coordination between a campaign committee, and certain special interest groups. The campaign committee that is under the microscope is almost certainly Friends of Scott Walker, which was his campaign committee. And then when a source familiar with the probe was asked, is it Friends of Scott Walker? The secret source said, good guess, that's it. Now, some others were reluctant to say that it was actually the Walker campaign, but one of the five suspects, there is a tax-exempt 501c4 social welfare nonprofit, the Wisconsin Club for Growth, which decided to out itself as one of the groups under investigation. That is a special interest group that also has ties to Scott Walker. So it's looking up and down like this is the Scott Walker campaign that is being investigated for illegal campaign finance violations, and we will have to wait and see. But, remember, Scott Walker is the guy who was busted in college for illegally campaigning in an election and then had to leave college. So that's not proof of anything, but a lot of things here are sounding, talking, and walking like a duck.
Right. I'm sure it's all true. Scott Walker is a total dirtbag, but this is all coming a little too late, isn't it? I mean, the damage has been done. He beat the hell out of Wisconsin, and the damage has been done. It's hard to reverse now, and this is just a little too late.
Typically, when these probes happen, the perpetrators usually don't actually have any kind of significant punishment. Sometimes there's fines, rarely jail time. However, it is yet another Republican now, in addition to soon Chris Christie, who is going to be off the table as untouchable for the 2016 election. Yeah.
And this is the type of investigating that needs to be done during the campaign, although I know that's difficult.
Yeah.
But, stop this at its source, right?
Absolutely. And like you said, it's tough to do it often during the campaigns because you need the records after they've been filed and then you start investigating it piece by piece. I have two very sad stories related to children and firearms. A 17 months old, was shot by a 3-year-old, and a 9-year-old was shot dead by a 14-year-old. 17-month-old girl is in the hospital and is expected to survive after she was shot by her 3-year-old brother with their father's gun. The father's name is Justin Carper. He writes a parenting column for a local newspaper and is also a youth leader at his church. Police have not yet arrested him or charged him with anything. He is a contributing writer for the Shelby Star. He's not a paid employee, but writes a column. The 17-month-old girl was shot in Patterson Springs, according to an investigator with the Cleveland County Sheriff's Department. Fortunately, the child is expected to survive. The family was doing renovations to the house, and the 9mm gun was on a dresser. The little boy climbed the dresser, grabbed the gun, and shot his sister. Another story from over the weekend sent to me by Ophelia. A 9-year-old Boston boy was negligently shot and killed by his older brother, who has been charged in connection with the death. Police Commissioner William Evans says the 9-year-old was shot in the chest, taken to Boston Medical Center, and that his older brother thought the weapon was empty when he shot it at his little brother. The 14-year-old actually fled the scene, was apprehended. The boy's mother was working with the police, facing charges that include involuntary manslaughter, unlawful possession of a firearm. I don't know what to say, Lewis. I know that I'm kind of not even really talking to the always pro-gun group, more guns make us safer group, because they will argue that this was simply the responsibility of the parents, or that laws were broken to obtain the gun. In the case of the 14-year-old, we don't know where the gun came from yet. So what good would it be to pass more restrictions on law-abiding citizens? I'm really speaking to the group, maybe to the group that organized in North Carolina, that I'll tell you about a little bit later today. Those who are really doing activism on the streets and who want some kind of change. The idea that just more guns are going to be the solution here at this point seems to be a completely morally bankrupt proposition.
Right. And not all of them are making the case that we need more guns, but certainly the gun lobby is doing everything they can to make sure more guns are sold, kind of using these people as a vessel to do that, and they're completely oblivious to it.
Yeah, and I just, every time you get it, when you look at the YouTube comments to our gun-related videos, you hear the same things. Guns don't shoot people. Somebody has to pull the trigger to shoot someone. This is all about people, not about guns. Well, the problem is too many people can too easily get these guns, in part because there are so many guns in circulation. And as a sheer numbers game, forget for a second about moving guns between states or not, and background checks, and just forget about all of it for a second. Let's just have a very simple, logical, casual conversation. If there are 50 million guns in the country owned by people instead of 150 million guns, does it not become apparent that someone trying to get a gun illegally will have a tougher time if there are 100 million less guns in circulation? How can you argue against that basic tenet?
Right. That makes sense to me. There are countries where people don't really have any guns, and in those countries, there are very, very few gun-related crimes. It's just that it's hard to deny that.
We have now seen the interesting opening ceremony for the 2014 Sochi Olympics in Sochi, Russia. And there was this kind of glitch with the fifth ring, which some people find very, very funny. It was actually kind of funny to see that, and also sad after so much planning to see a glitch in kind of the main thing, the logo of the Olympics. But in the background of all this, we can't seem to escape the issue of anger and disappointment over the Olympics being hosted by a country that has this ban on so-called gay propaganda as it pertains to children. Washington Post put together an interesting article which reminds us of something that I said last week or the week before, which is that 8 U.S. states have policies that are very similar to Russia's ban on so-called gay propaganda. 8 states limit speech about homosexuality in ways that are very similar to, if not quite as far-reaching, as the Russian ban that is at the heart of so much controversy right now. The states have so-called no promo homo bans, and these are prohibitions of classroom instruction that so-called promotes homosexuality. In many cases, this includes just mentioning that sometimes there are gay couples. That apparently is a promotion of homosexuality to some. And Yale University law professors looked at some of those laws. The 8 states are Alabama, Arizona, Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah. 8 states, according to the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. Let's look at Utah, for example. Utah has a law that prohibits the advocacy of homosexuality. Arizona prohibits portrayals of homosexuality as a positive alternative lifestyle. Look at the number of words in there that make absolutely no sense. Lifestyle, I mean, it's just incredible. And also a portrayal is incredible. Alabama and Texas mandate that sex ed classes emphasize that homosexuality is not an acceptable lifestyle to the general public. Not only is the term lifestyle absurd, it's also factually wrong. More than 50% of Americans actually think that there should be legal same-sex marriage or civil unions. So remember that, number one, even though homosexual acts could be illegal in Texas, bestiality is still legal in Texas. Don't forget that, Lewis. I know you're in Texas now. It's important for you to know this. And also that when we look and rightly criticize what is happening in Russia, don't forget what's happening in this country. Don't forget that you can be fired for being gay, and I think it's 23 or more states. We need to remember what's going on here, too.
We do, but there are some positive things happening here as well, whereas in Russia, it seems there are no positive things happening.
Well, I guess on the books, you can't be fired for being gay in Russia, although if you just Google fired for being gay in Russia, you'll see it still happens all the time and the police rarely get involved. So at least we can say that on paper, maybe that's something, but it's still a pretty disappointing situation. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to tell you about the protests in North Carolina over the weekend. Much to know about later, your voicemails, an update on the Indiegogo campaign. A lot happening today. Glad you're with us on a Monday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. When reality just doesn't live up to right-wing ideals, there's only one possible explanation. Reality itself suffers from liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's member of the day is Gilbert Vansoy. Gilbert Vansoy, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Gilbert at davidpakman.com/membership. Also, huge news with the Indiegogo campaign. Thanks to a $1,000, a $1,500, a $2,500, and a $3,500 contribution over the weekend, in addition to close to 200 other contributions from different contributors, we now are really on a roll with the Indiegogo campaign to expand this show to 5 days a week. If you've been waiting to make your contributions, you wanted to see how much momentum is generated first, please wait no more. We are down to only 13 days to go in the campaign. Go to davidpakman.com. Blue Indiegogo banner at the top of the page takes you there. Amazon items. You can support our show by using the Amazon banner at davidpakman.com. Click it, bookmark it, use it whenever you shop. A lot of people lately have been buying juicers and juice recipe books. I have been thinking, to be quite honest, about getting a juicer. The thing is this. The research I've done is confusing me because on the one hand, you have these really great juicers that give you perfectly strained juice with no grit, and then you empty out the back of all the pulp. But I would imagine that actually removes most of the nutrition if you're not juicing the entire fruit. So in my mind, you'd think it would be healthier and more nutritious to get one that's almost like a full blender, so you keep all of the fruit as opposed to taking out a bunch of the pulp. I don't know much about it, Lewis. Do you have a thought on this?
I had a juicer and I just wasn't big into it. I personally would rather go with a nice blender that can just puree everything and kind of give you all of the nutrients, because I think you're right. You have to be losing something there.
Yeah, when you take out all but the full liquid and you dump it out, or, as some of the infomercials say, use it to make breads, I think you're losing a lot of the nutrition there. Anyway, if you're one of these juicers who have been using our Amazon link, let me know what you're doing with that thing. Also, I saw a Texas Instruments TI-84 graphing calculator. It really brought back memories, Lewis, of playing Snake on the graphing calculators and how you could save formulas with the memory, but then the teachers figured that out and then would make you clear the memory before tests. It was it's amazing how many years it's been now since I actually used a graphing calculator, but I still actually have mine in storage in Massachusetts.
Nice. It was such a bummer when you got one that didn't have any games on it.
Yeah, especially for Lewis, who wasn't too big on schoolwork, if I recall correctly. Okay, huge protest in North Carolina to protest all of the right-wing extremism that we've been reporting out of North Carolina for years at this point. Think Progress is reporting that somewhere between, listen to this, 80,000 to 100,000 people from 32 states turned out to protest 4 years of drastically outrageous, extreme Republican initiatives in Raleigh, North Carolina on Saturday. This was called the Moral March on Raleigh, organized by historic thousands on Jones Street. They marched from Shaw University to the state capitol to push back against the immoral and unconstitutional policies of Republican Governor Pat McCrory during the 2013 North Carolina General Assembly. Remember, Pat McCrory is the guy who campaigned on not messing at all with abortion rights and then tried to pass a bill telling teachers how they have to teach about abortion and said, it's not an abortion bill, it's an education bill. One of the most absurd wordsmithings of the political last 4 or 5 years for sure. In any case, activists have been gathering at weekly protests called Moral Mondays. They put together this huge protest. It's great to see this, even if it doesn't really make it past internet news. A couple of news stations doing stories about this. Remember, the Tea Party got plenty of coverage even when like 40 people showed up. And here we're talking about 80 to 100,000 people from 32 different states protesting Republican extremism. This is what we need. The only question I have is, will this translate to progressives voting in 2014, not staying home, even though it's a midterm election?
Tough question. That's an important campaign right there. I wonder if there will be a counter protest from some of the more conservative-minded people in North Carolina.
Yeah, we know that the talking point is that progressives aren't very interested in voting, not very motivated for 2014. I really hope that doesn't lead to Republicans scooping up a bunch of Senate and House seats, but we'll follow it and we'll see. The ultimate plutocracy. Listen to this. I talk very often about how on many issues, Republicans and Democrats are different, but on many issues, very important issues, Republicans and Democrats really aren't very different. And Slate has published an article pointing out all of the different Obama fundraisers who now have been appointed to be ambassadors to different countries around the world by President Obama. It is not necessary to be a U.S. ambassador to speak the native language of the country where you would like to be placed, or even to have ever visited the place. It appears that if you are able to gather to be a bundler, someone who bundles donors for a president, that's really the best way to be appointed ambassador. And there's a list of President Obama's 23 so-called bundlers who he has nominated to diplomatic posts around the world. Here's a couple. Kirk Wager has been appointed ambassador to Singapore, raised $1.2 million for President Obama. Matthew Barzun has been appointed to the United Kingdom, raised $1.2 million for President Obama. Mark Gilbert has been appointed to New Zealand and Samoa, raised $1.2 million for President Obama. This is business as usual in politics, and whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, this is the system. Some will defend President Obama by saying, this is just the way it works. The finance system makes it so he needs that money, and he needs to incentivize and reward those who are able to bundle those donations. That's fine, but we have to be honest and make the exact same exculpatory statement about a Republican. We can't pick sides on this because it is such an like an insider key part of the political system right now. This is just what it is. This is how you become an ambassador. You raise money for the president.
This is funny. I mean, it's kind of like gambling in a way, because presumably you give someone money because you want them to become president.
Right.
And, well, congratulations, they became president. But now you're seeking ambassadorship as part of this. So it's kind of like gambling, because you're betting on President Obama, but had Mitt Romney won, you would not be that ambassador, would you?
No, and some are defending this by saying these are the countries where it kind of just makes sense. You're sending someone there who did a really good job raising money for you. They are not the countries with much conflict where you really need seasoned diplomats. What's the big deal? And okay, I mean, if that's your point of view, if you really just don't care about this, don't care about the fact that this entire mechanism of fundraising and then giving these great plum appointments to people around the world is just kind of part of the status quo and not a big deal, then I would encourage you to look at so many of the other areas where the campaign finance system is creating problem after problem after problem. Fox News, I'm sure, could spin this to criticize President Obama a different way. Maybe the headline would be, President Obama continues deportation of the 1%, or something like that, of, I guess, the people who are bundling all this money for him. A society ruled and dominated by a small minority of the wealthiest citizens. That is what we have. Let's take a break. We'll talk to Christopher Petrella next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me once again today is Christopher Petrella. He's a PhD student in UC Berkeley's Department of African American Studies. His research focuses on race, class, and incarceration in the United States. He's taught a class at San Quentin State Prison, and prison policy is also an area of expertise. That's what we're here to talk about today. So, Christopher, great to have you as always. You have this new piece in the Journal of Radical Criminology called The Color of Corporate Corrections Part 2. We've talked on this program with you and with others about private prisons. We've talked about the disproportionate incarceration of minorities, particularly for nonviolent crimes often connected to the war on drugs. What you're studying specifically here is specifically within private prisons, whether we see different rates of incarceration among minorities. Is it for specific crimes, or how did you look at it?
Right. Well, thanks for having me on, David. I appreciate it. One of the sort of chief purposes of my study was to think about what the demographic, particularly racial demographic, of public versus private prisons is today. And unfortunately, there wasn't really that much data on this. So I went to state departments of corrections. I also went to private prison companies and requested basically as much data I could on racial composition of these private facilities. And what I ended up finding was that in the 9 states that I looked at, the 9 states that had the largest sample size, people of color were overrepresented in minimum and medium security private facilities relative to minimum and medium security public facilities. I didn't look at differential rates of crime. I also didn't necessarily look at the types of criminalization or the types of sentences. That was beyond the purview of the study.
Okay, so when we look at those numbers, then we have to ask ourselves, we've talked with you before about the interest that big corporations and big banks and investment houses have in a lot of these private prisons. We know the interest that private prisons have in extending or delaying the process of deportation of illegal immigrants so that way they can charge more days of detention for those who are awaiting trial.
That's right.
What do you see as how do you kind of tie it all together? Do you have ideas as to the reasoning that you speculate on? Have you done other research that might inform us on that?
Sure. Well, so the research endeavors to do a couple of things, right? So the first was I had a question about racial composition. That ultimately led me to questions of age and health. And what I found out was not only are these private prison companies differentially incarcerating communities of color relative to their public prison counterparts, but the age profile of the private prisons that I considered is far different than the public prisons that I considered. if the likelihood that you are a young person in a private prison is far greater than you being a young person in a public prison. Now, why is that? Written into private prison contracts between the state DOCs and also the federal government are particular provisions that exempt private prison companies from housing the most expensive types of individuals. And as you can imagine, who would those individuals be? Well, they would be older and or geriatric individuals. They would be individuals with a chronic illness. They would be non-compliant individuals. And so what I ended up finding was, I can provide a couple examples here. Arizona, for instance, the contracts I've seen between Arizona and Corrections Corporation of America are written in such a way that Corrections Corporation of America puts a $10,000 cap on health spending per year per prisoner. The minute you exceed that cap, if you're in the private prison, you get sent back to the public prison, right? I'll give you one other example. In Mississippi, MTC, which is Management and Training Corporation, it's the third largest private prison company in the United States, does not cover mental health care, which we know is incredibly expensive, right? So the other thrust of the whole paper, of the whole argument, is that if you're not incarcerating the same profile of individuals, then it's virtually impossible to make a valid argument, if you're a private prison company, that you can do this more cheaply or more inexpensively than your public counterparts. So
well, it's incredible because we have it's an amazing racket that they have going, because on the one hand, lots of these private corporations, when they strike deals with the states, they have occupancy requirements where the state is required to maintain, it could be 90, 95, 98% occupancy. And if they don't, they still have to pay as if that was the number of prisoners there. At the same time, you're giving examples of, if the prisoners you send us get too expensive, we send them back to you and you deal with the rest of the expense.
That is absolutely correct.
So when we look at this, we have to remember, I think it's important, what percentage of the country's prisoners are in private prisons? It's not that high, correct?
No, it's not that high. It's depending on how you classify private prisons, it's anywhere from about 9 to 12% of the entire carceral population.
Okay, so, and we are seeing some moves. I know Kentucky has eliminated all private prisons at this point, and a couple of other states have moved prisons from private to public. Are we seeing broadly a trend away from private incarceration?
Yeah, I think the public is a bit more suspicious these days. I'll put it that way. In the early 1980s, when a lot of these contract facilities were just getting off the ground, the public was a little, I'll say a little wary of what this would mean from a legal perspective, what this would mean from an ethical perspective, what this could mean from a fiscal perspective. And unfortunately, what happens is that inertia takes over, despite even the best intentions of those who may oppose these, privatization regimes. But I think we're starting to see the tides turn again, and a lot of folk, both progressives and conservatives, and this I think is particularly important for activism and organizing, are becoming much more suspicious, particularly those who once supported private prisons, namely conservatives.
Yeah, and it could be for different reasons, but coming to the same realization. Last thing, to take a step kind of back and look at things more broadly, when we talk about race and incarceration, I think it's always important for people to remember that much of the war on drugs, which has been one of the leading factors in the disproportionate incarceration of minorities in the United States, did stem as a sort of reaction to the desegregation and civil rights movement of the 1960s. So we have to remember that some of the kind of racially tinged effects of incarceration may have happened as a result of chance, but initially the war on drugs was in part a very racially tinged movement.
Yeah, that's right, David. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, part of the calculus of my study relies heavily on a so-called drug war movement, because precisely the reason that the younger the prisoner you are, the higher likelihood that you're a person of color, and the older the prisoner you are, the higher likelihood that the census would classify you as non-Hispanic white, is precisely based on historical sentencing patterns that emanate from the so-called drug war. And just one final point here. Before the mid 1960s, ever since the 1920s, when the Bureau of Justice Statistics started keeping a lot of these aggregate pieces of data, 2/3 of the correctional population would be classified as non-Hispanic white. That's completely inverted today, right? About 1/3 are now classified as non-Hispanic white, and the remainder, 2/3, up to even 70%, based on which studies you consider, are persons of color. And this, yes, is absolutely a result of the so-called war on drugs, which disproportionately criminalized communities of color and continues to do so.
We've been speaking with Christopher Petrella. The journal article is The Color of Corporate Corrections, Part 2. It's in the Journal of Radical Criminology. Great as always to have you on.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I love these clips. We have another one of the 700 Club email questions for Pat Robertson. This one's from Jillian, who was wondering if someone can get infested with demons if they are either put under hypnosis or put under anesthesia for medical procedures. I have a really hard time believing that these are real, honest questions and that the Pat Robertson Show isn't getting trolled, but he's insisting that these are real questions. We had one of his former co-hosts or guest hosts on the show a few months ago, and he also insisted, Ben Kinchlow, that these are real questions. Listen to this.
Pat, this first one comes from Jillian, who says, my friend told me that he believes when someone is put under anesthesia, they might get infested with demons and mess up their mind. I have to get my wisdom teeth out soon. I'm terrified. What do you think?
They don't have to knock you out to get your wisdom teeth out.
Well, they kind of do that today.
They
like
do?
They send you many times for wisdom teeth to surgeons. And
well, but they can do a shot with Novocaine.
I guess they could.
I would think. But they give you laughing gas. It just makes you happy. You're like,
I'm for being knocked out myself.
No, I don't think it's a danger of being taken over by demonic. I do think when people are hypnotized, though, it's a power of suggestion, and you are opening yourself up at that point because you are willingly getting your mind giving over to saying yes, yes. You're tired, and next thing you know, you're under great suggestion. So I think being hypnotized is a danger, but having an anesthesia, I don't think so. I think God will protect you. He does. He protects us.
Okay, so I guess he says anesthesia is fine, but hypnosis is where there's real trouble. Could this be a real email? Here are the things that Pat Robertson has said are demonic. And sweaters from like a thrift store, those could be demonic. Low-carb diets violate God's principles. Dungeons and Dragons is demonic. Yoga is demonic, etc., etc., etc. Why has God created such an evil world where so many things that you come across day to day are demonic? That's what really is the question if I were accepting Pat Robertson's analysis as true, my question wouldn't be how to avoid those things. It would be, why has God made so many things contain demons?
Yeah, I can understand his fear of hypnosis, though. I mean, when people think of that stereotypical Hollywood hypnosis, someone's in a trance, and whenever someone's in a trance, that's not good. And maybe just being hypnotized kind of opens you up. If you're not, focused, if you're not aware, a demon could just slip right in. Yeah,
unannounced and unseen. His moment of clarity that we talked about last week, Pat Robertson's, where he actually said that Ken Ham, the guy from the Creationism Museum, has got to stop the creationism stuff because it makes no sense. That moment of clarity has clearly passed, and we're now back to anesthesia is okay, but hypnosis, that's really, really bad. Demons will just slip in. A Christian school has decided to serve fried chicken and watermelon for Black History Month. Students at Carondelet High School for girls in Concord wanted to come up with ways to celebrate Black History Month in a lunchtime celebration. So the California Christian School announced a lunch of fried chicken, cornbread, and watermelon, which are all, what would you call them, Lewis? Foods that are stereotypically affiliated with African Americans?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Students and parents were outraged and offended. The principal and dean of the school was refusing to talk to NBC Bay Area, but school officials did an assembly and they announced that they apologized. They said they don't want to offend anyone. They sent an apology letter to the parents. They said that they didn't want to perpetrate racial stereotypes. If they didn't want to, then they were able to do it completely effortlessly by putting together this lunch menu. Now, the counter argument is if you look at the comments on this video, these news stories and videos online, lots of people are saying, this isn't racist. It's racist because you're making it racist. If there was a Asian History Month and there was sushi, for example, that wouldn't be racist at all. And then it's like, well, hold on a second. Is it Japanese history or Asian history? Why would there even be sushi if it were, I don't know, anything other than Japanese culture? It's not necessarily racist. What we have to look at is, how was this devised? What was the goal of a meal of fried chicken and watermelon? And are those images that are typically associated with stereotypes that are not particularly positive? I think anybody who analyzes it clearly would say, yes, those are stereotypes that often take on a negative connotation. I have to tell you, Lewis, fried chicken, watermelon, cornbread, and also collard greens, these are some of my favorite foods. And I'm not only am I offended that they are using these caricature-like images of black people, I'm offended that they're only assuming black people like those foods.
Yeah, David, everyone loves fried chicken, except for people who are repulsed by meat or just don't like that they're that it used to be an animal that was alive. If this was Southern History Month, or if this was, I don't know, name a state where they grow lots of watermelons. If it was that state's History Month,
right,
then that might make some sense. But this is clearly very racist, and we have here another Christian school where the people there just don't really get it.
Our voicemail line is available 24 hours a day. Comment about this or another story. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail about our vaccination story.
Hey guys, it's Matt from Canada. Thank you for talking about vaccines on your show. Vaccines are awesome. They're the greatest public health measure that we as a human species have ever come up with, and they don't cause autism. I also want to mention that everyone getting vaccinated, even if you're really healthy, is important because of this thing called herd immunity. There are people out there who can't get vaccines who are immunosuppressed. And if everyone else gets vaccinated, we can help protect them. By getting vaccines, I'm protecting my 93-year-old grandmother. I'm protecting my infant son.
Yeah, this is something that we actually missed, which is people say, hey, vaccinate your kid. I don't want to vaccinate mine, so I won't. It doesn't affect anybody else. It does, because there are people who cannot be vaccinated. And if there are more unvaccinated people running around, the chances of infection go way, way up, the chances of contagion, rather. Let's go to one more voicemail here.
Hello, this is Travis. I'm stationed right now in Colorado. I'm originally from Texas, though, but just wanted to tell you, like the show. I'm kind of one of those guys that's not really completely liberal, no offense, but I'm also one of those guys that's not really completely conservative or really don't identify with most political labels out there. I think they're kind of bad, but just want to tell you, like your show, watch it pretty regularly and doing a good job. Keep it up, brother.
Well, thank you. And again, Lewis, more evidence that in spite of what a couple angry emails and commenters said, plenty of members of the military watch this program, listen to this program. We get emails, videos from them. Many of them are members. And then here is a very nice voicemail from someone. So thank you. And we will, of course, have more great stories on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. Please don't forget about the Indiegogo campaign. Less than 2 weeks to go. We have significant momentum. Help us keep it going. davidpakman.com, blue Indiegogo banner at the top of the page. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening to the show. We will be back tomorrow with a brand new program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.